time for another round of Brandy. Candid conversations over cocktails about all things brand with your hosts, Reilly Newman and Scott Saunders, the brand developers behind Motif Brands.
Well, welcome back to another round of Brandy. Reilly and I are going to be talking about a subject today that we haven't really talked about much, and it struck me the other day when I was watching TV or something, and it's the idea of mascots and branding and how they are utilized or how they have been. And it seems like the golden age of brands back in the mid-century, the 20th century, the 50s and the 60s, and even before then,
the Mad Men.
Yeah, there was always there was a stigma about these. When I think of the term mascot, it's funny because I don't really think of brands. I think of sports teams.
Yeah,
like we're used to every high school. You probably whatever high school you went to, you had a mascot. But mascots became a visual representation for brands long ago, and I'm even talking about like Ronald McDonald is a classic one, or Tony the Tiger. For Frosted Flakes cereal. There's always the Michelin Man, for Michelin tires. There's mascots have always been around in branding, but how do they affect a brand? And I think that's kind of what we're leading into, right, Reilly?
Yeah, and I feel like, when you think of even like the Thanksgiving Day parade, you just see mascot upon mascot upon mascot of they represent so much more than just the character they are, and they're this extension of the brand, but it's like this embodiment. Like Ronald McDonald, he isn't the logo, yet he means McDonald's.
Yeah, you see him, you think McDonald's. The logo of McDonald's is the golden arches. But then you flip it around to another way, like I mentioned the Michelin Man. What about, and you mentioned Mason Day's Float, which made me think of the Jolly Green Giant.
Yeah.
And that's a huge frozen vegetable brand, right? I grew up with that brand in the 70s.
Peas?
It was green beans and peas. I remember the commercials and him, and he's kind of part of the logo. He's got a place on the packaging next to the word mark. Or other mascots. Again, we talked earlier as we were kind of before we decided to record this. We're talking about through just random brands in different sectors. Like I think of most of the cereals.
Oh yeah.
Mostly sugared cereals, particularly, right? Whether it's Toucan Sam or Lucky the Rabbit or Snap Crackle Pop.
Yeah, and even just beyond food, you think about the Energizer Bunny, how long that's been around, or even Geico's Gecko. And I think that's what spurred this conversation is you saw one of those commercials, and it's like his personality, the tone he has, everything about that gecko it's become iconic now for the brand. And to that point, I think that's why mascots are so interesting. They introduce personality and tone in a way that a brand could have a lot more difficult time trying to do. Like even Ronald McDonald, or even like I just thought of Bush's Beans with like the dog. And that whole thing of you have this relationship with this dog. It's a classic, golden retriever, and you have this whole relationship where then I think it's the Bush guy, but it's his relationship with the dog, and the dog's always kind of like, I think he talks or something, but it's a voice that you're starting to encapsulate and then associate with the brand. And there's something kind of magical about it that's charming. And like you said, it's like even with the cereals or food products, like you do have them engaging with the product, but then beyond that, you do have, like you mentioned, Michelin star or Michelin tires with the Michelin Man, where it's like his body, his look, everything about him is associated with the brand itself, which sells tires, which is actually like the opposite of what he looks like.
When
like
you mentioned
tires.
it brings about it can bring about brand signals. Right, for the brand. Like it made me think of, like, for instance, Brawny has the lumberjack guy. And so you're thinking Brawny, like even in the name, but even they could have just had Brawny on the side. But the fact that they're showing this bearded lumberjack, who's like a Paul Bunyan kind of guy.
He's chiseled.
It makes you feel like these are tough. These paper towels are tough and will not rip or tear. So it kind of supports the brand's qualities it's trying to communicate. Or the Planters peanut guy. The guy's got a top hat, cane, and a monocle. And already by just having that on the packaging, that is implying you're having a nice cocktail party. Planters peanuts are part of your fine cocktail party. That may be a black tie affair, but if you're going to have some mixed nuts to go with your cocktail, fine, fancy cocktails, Planters is the choice. Yeah. It's like they don't say that. They make Planters so accessible, but yet it's implied that it is it's more sophisticated than the other.
Yeah, and that's a good point, especially when you think of like peanuts as themselves. Peanuts in the shell are typically like that's associated with baseball, with mess, with all these things. And so then you take the same product, you de-shell it, and then you make it like elevated to like this cocktail party vibe.
Yeah. We talk about brand having a personality and its tone, whether it's serious, whether it's sophisticated, alluring, elusive, accessible, guy everybody likes, whatever it is, right? And you do that through your voice, how you message, how you talk, how everything, tone. But sometimes mascot can help bring like you said, a face to the person, right? It's kind of it brings a little more of a personality or face to it. Whether that is KFC and Colonel Sanders, or Jack and Jack in the Box. So you mentioned Ronald McDonald's. Pretty much, I mean, a good amount of fast food, franchises rely on mascots, but not all of them.
That's right, because it's like every episode we do on Brandy, we give you insights into brand and marketing, but nothing is a silver bullet. Nothing can apply to all businesses across the board. It's like every business is different, and every brand should be distinct.
Fast food, for example, I don't think their In-N-Out has a mascot, right?
No, I don't think so.
Not a mascot. There's a lot of bigger fast food chains that don't rely on that, and some do.
And I think there's like two main things that I see. Mascots are kind of this vehicle that you get two cornerstones of brand through it, and it's like familiarity, which is it's an identifiable. You can recognize the person or the character, right? Whether it's Mickey Mouse, Mr. Peanut, or Ronald McDonald.
You see the freckled faced girl, and that's Wendy.
Yeah,
right from Wendy's hamburgers.
And so then through these characters or these mascots, you not only then kind of become relational with them, you add emotion to them, you add tonality and personality, but then we associate meaning with those. And so just like Scott was saying about with Mr. Peanut, where it changed the meaning of peanuts just as much as, like Mickey Mouse can change the meaning of something by Mickey Mouse being involved with it. It's like it gives more meaning and story and depth to it. And so when you think of brand, it's like that's what we're trying to do, is that the meaning can reframe something, just like it can reframe, baseball peanuts to now cocktail, party peanuts. It's like it can change the meaning, change the frame by which we're referencing it, and then that means like change the value, change how we perceive it. And that's really, again, when we go back to brand, it's all about perception. So if a mascot can be an effective vehicle to actually adjusting that meaning and that perceived value, it's like that's the golden ticket.
Right. But it has to be applicable and it has to make sense, and that's why
you don't just want
it's
anything.
not like if you're listening to this and you're a small business owner and you've got a brand and you're striving hard on that, walking away going, okay, I got to have a mascot. and maybe not, because it may be that face is more about. It could be the actual person behind the brand.
Yep.
We were talking earlier, and Reilly, you brought it like Steve Jobs with Apple, or Bill Gates with Microsoft, or
Richard Branson with
Virgin. So sometimes, or Elon Musk and Tesla.
Yeah.
Like, is there a mascot for Tesla? Well, loosely, if you look at Elon being the face of Tesla, then he maybe is a mascot. But I think there's also a difference between that and we talked about this, and like utilizing a famous face to endorse product endorsement. So what's the difference between, say, Michael Jordan, being the strong face of Nike versus Ryan Reynolds and Aviation Gin?
Right. Yeah.
Is there a difference there?
Nike is focused on, for example, they're wanting to help everyone feel like an athlete. And that's what the Michael Jordan Air Ones, all these things we're pushing towards. If you wear these shoes, you can feel like Michael Jordan, you can play like him, you can do all these things, and it's aspirational and it feeds into that athletic aspiration. Versus, Ryan Reynolds and Aviation Gin, it's like that is a personality and it's an expression of the brand in that way. When you're drinking or choosing Aviation Gin for your cocktail, it's like you're not aspiring to be like Ryan Reynolds or think you're going to become funny like him when you drink. You might, but but it's like it's an expression of the brand, and it's an extension. And to me, it's like, again, it's that vehicle that you're creating familiarity with the person, and then that meaning. And that's what, again, going back to Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, Richard Branson with the Virgin, it's like these characters, for lack of better words, like they embodied something about the brand. Like Steve Jobs, he was that very accurate, precision focused, very almost like perfectionist in so many ways. And that told you something about the Apple brand. He was innovative. He was forward thinking, just like Elon Musk. It's like the guy, super rich, but also he's thinking about the future. He's thinking way ahead.
Pretty innovative.
And that now we apply that to Tesla and going, oh, Tesla's not a car company, right? There's these implications that come along with the characters, just like Mr. Peanut, right? Mr. Peanut says, hey, these peanuts are for a cocktail party. Right. He wears a top hat. He's fancy.
Sometimes that face is part of the brand. It's not the face behind the brand. It's the face of the brand. For instance, I think of brands like Orville Redenbacher, Popcorn, or Newman's Own.
Yeah. And I feel like these brands like Newman's Own, even like almost like fashion brands as well, where you have Tom Ford or some designer name where it is a personal brand to a degree. And then now it's bred into this product, into the brand and what it represents, and that perception of it.
If it was the grandmother's recipe, the grandma is the featured face behind the brand. May not be part of the logo either, but maybe her photo is on the back of the label with a little bit of story in it.
See's Candy. They have the grandma.
Exactly. Mary C's.
Is that her name?
Was Mary C's. So, I think there's time and place, because I guess what the reality is the birth of Mascots, I think, came about through the birth of television and advertising. That's when it really became a heyday, because you'd have a show that would be sponsored by something else, and so sometimes having a guy dressed in an old tiger costume and saying they're great, in a tiny little 30-second spot to pitch the cereal as the show's sponsor, it birthed that type of advertising. So really, a lot of these characters that are just huge that we associate, whether it's the Energizer Bunny, the Geico Gecko, the Aflac Duck, right?
That's another one.
Where even the duck started off as a ad campaign, national commercial ad campaign, then eventually became a signature component to its actual logo. So now Aflac's logo has the duck image because there's such a correlation there. But let's be honest, a lot of the small businesses out there, most small businesses out there, are not having mega recognizable celebrity endorsements, B, aren't doing national, like heavy, print ad, like on a national level, where again, the saturation is so big that mascot becomes synonymous with the brand. They're not there. So how then can they start positioning or doing things to help provide this face to the brand? What are some other ways that they can do it?
Yeah, and I think it's going back to kind of cost-effective ways of going, okay, how do we present meaning? How do we signal that? That can be through brand messaging, that can be through imagery, that can be through social media, and these more very simple ways of communicating and getting the point across, whether that is changing the tonality in your writing or doing more videos or just adding some personality to it, because a lot of these smaller businesses, they'll kind of just default and follow along with what other businesses are doing because it's safe, but they lack the personality. They're not standing out. They're not doing these things.
Right.
But that's exactly why it's so important to have that creativity. And what I always say is like being clever. Be clever in your market and do things that are creative, that are strategic. And that's where you can really get that leg up, is that a great mascot is that, And so if you can create those impressions in different ways where the brand is able to express that creativity, that you do start digging out more of your moat to protect your business and be distinct, then your competition can't copy you. Someone can't come along and just duplicate what you're doing, but you're starting to dig that out, because really a mascot being that extension of the brand is that moat. It's a protected asset, intellectual property, really, that represents your business. It adds that value. Just like if another company came around and started doing a gecko, a green little gecko that talks about really boring things like insurance, that's already protected. That's someone else's property. Like, someone else can't come along and just do that. And so it really adds value to the brand in that way. And so when you do think of cost-effective ways for a small business to really tap into this, I would say it goes back to just really great writing, really great personality and tone, and expressing that in all the ways you can as a small business, whether it's your signage or your messaging on the website, or even if you have some packaging and labels, really bringing personality to that and having that creativity and that bravery to stand out and be distinct and really reach your potential.
And be I would be mindful of if you're posing this question, if you're listening to this podcast and kind of walking away from it thinking, should I somehow incorporate a mascot into my brand or something?
It's definitely not one size fits all. Look at your market sector. Look at who you're selling to. I mean, you look at banks. You just don't really see mascots in banks. You may even, if you think of like telecommunication, it's kind of not like that. But even AT&T, they had their girl who was like a spokesperson for a lot of campaigns, and then you also had Verizon with their "Can you hear me now" guy that lasted a while.
The automotive industry.
Yeah.
Now, yes, you might have with, for instance, Michelin tires or Carfax, where they've got the little fox, right?
Yeah.
But those are one-offs. They're in the. But I'm talking about like Ford, Dodge, all of the main auto manufacturers. They do brand well, but if there's a brand that if your brand, I would say maybe if your business is in a sector that there aren't really any, and you're trying to find ways to make yourself distinctive, your brand stand out from the crowd, well, then maybe that might be something to consider. But again, you got to do it in a smart way, because I've seen some really cheesy like people are like they're trying too hard to find something that could serve as this brand character that they can use. And it's like, no, it's got to make sense, and it's got to be on point with what your audience is going to expect or want.
Yeah. And I think the unfortunate thing with mascots is that they do err towards the cartoony, very, character driven, but that doesn't mean you can't have someone like the Dos Equis guy, right? He's a personality. He's encompassing something about the brand of being the most interesting man in the world. And there's a story there. It tells you something about, man, if I drink that drink, I could be interesting like him, right? And if he's not cartoony, he is like, it's comedic and over the top. But you do think about these characters, like that is kind of they are kind of like hyperbolic in that way, is that they are very exaggerated.
Yeah, and they're communicating something, but at the same time, those, like in that case, it's a campaign. And it may not be limited. Even the mascots of old, Ronald McDonald, he comes in and out of phases. Every now and then I see him, right? It used to be the day and age where he was the spokesman. He was like everywhere. And then it's kind of like every now and then, I think the brands that have had a mascot over the years, like decades, it's like every now and then they kind of put the mascot in storage, and then every now and then dust it off, right? And reinvent it. When Jack, I remember growing up with Jack in the Box in the 70s. It was not the Jack that your generation, Reilly, has come to know and love. The sarcastic, remember the Jack?
He's funny. He's like
funny commercials with Jack, who was like the CEO, and that is not. I remember as a kid in the 70s having this little rubber like Happy Meal toy Jack, and they had other characters. It's kind of like the Hamburglar with McDonald's and all these other stuff. Jack had that, and it went away.
Yeah. And
then I forget what year it was, but they brought Jack back. And it brought this new breath of life into Jack in the Box, and they were really updating their brand. And Jack helped carry the banner. And I think the same goes for some other brands that maybe back in the day they had one, and they come back again, or they do them away if they find them outdated.
Yeah, and it's hard not to think of mascots and see the pattern of like of humor. Is that you think of all the different mascots along? Is that they always have. There's humor involved with it, whether it's Geico, Aflac,
there's potential
State
to use
Farm
them.
with and they are campaign based, so they do have an ebb and flow, but they are still they're still embodying something about the brand. They're expressing something, and then they're using these characters to then express that humor side, which humor is proven extremely effective. Like humor works on everyone with every brand. It's very effective for marketing and brand building.
But it also communicates a signal of a certain tone, and so it might not be for everybody.
No,
and it's got to
exactly.
be done well. If it's done and falls flat, It's like a comedian, a stand-up comedian that just isn't funny. But he gets booed off stage. So using humor, you almost have to, like, for the small business, don't do it on your own, please. No, unless literally you've thought about, you're really good at it. Rely on other people, copywriters, agencies, other people that will write good copy and smart. It's like intelligent humor is the best, right? But when you try to get too tongue in cheek and try to be dad jokes and funny and stuff, it just, maybe your audience is into that, but good chance that it maybe isn't.
Well, when I heard this one, I think it was a comedian one time, and he said, "Laughter is the sound of understanding." And this author was talking about it. He's like, I just love that so much, because when you do think of an intelligent joke or an intelligent little kicker, anything like that, where when someone laughs, it is this, they get it, they're understanding it. So then if you can tie your brand or your product or what you're offering to that, and they're understanding that in one way or another, or you're, talking about it in a different way that just clicks, the laughter is that understanding. So having a well-written like joke, for that matter, it's like you got to have that, because then you can really leverage that use.
Yeah, and I see that in some of the pedestrian, like that, some of the brands that I've come across that I personally love. I mean, that's one of the things that got me into, like, Dollar Shave Club was great back in the day before they got bought out by Unilever and destroyed. Every time I would get my shipment of blades, they'd have a new funny saying on the outside that had something about changing your blades, and it was smart, it was intelligent, it was funny. It made that brand want me to have that brand in my life. Even things like, if you look at, like, sometimes back in the day when I had teenage boys, so we had a lot of Axe spray and shampoo and products, but Axe was really snarky in their product descriptions. Old Spice. Sometimes if you look at Old Spice and you look at the back on the directions and stuff, it's just they give you the directions, and they have to be legally, like, use it, blah, blah, blah. But then they can be a little funny, and it just plays off well. And to me, if I can find myself chuckling on the back of a deodorant, and I like to consider myself kind of fun-loving person, then there's a brand for me. Again, we all walk around with kind of a backpack of brands that we attach. We feel like they're a part of our life. They resonate with us because they get us and we get them. And so, like you brought up a great point with humor. So mascots can incorporate that a lot. But they could also be, I mean, they're not all funny, but most of them can be utilized for that. But again, if you have a very serious brand, you can have a serious mascot. I'm trying to think of one that, hypothetical, the Quaker guy on Quaker Oats. He's a mascot, but he's not funny. He's not supposed to be funny. He's not.
He's a Puritan.
He has no sense of humor. No, I don't know. I'm just. But you know what I mean? Like, so not all brand have to go down that.
No, and that's what makes me think of, like, the founder-led brands, like, Facebook with Mark Zuckerberg, or Steve Jobs for Apple. It's like, I wonder if the ones that the founder starts becoming the mascot, if those are more the serious. It's not like Steve Jobs is telling jokes, it's like, but he embodied something about it. Richard Branson, he's funny, but he's more outgoing and adventurous. He was more jumping out of blimps and doing crazy stuff, and he kind of embodied that about the Virgin brand. And so it's like, I wonder if it's a character, an actual created character, then it's comedic. Or if it's a founder, if it's like the owner or the founder or someone's face in that way, then it's a little more serious, and they're more highlighting the really strong attributes of the brand in a way.
But there's, again, supporting the idea that the takeaway is not that you have to run out and somehow work a mascot in your brand. No. Because there's some great brand, like I'm trying to think of, like, other brands that are just really strong, big brands, successful brands, no mascot. And I'm thinking, like, Verizon, Costco, even Amazon. Yeah, you could say, okay, Jeff Bezos, but he's not really. No, he's the guy making all the money off of it, but he's not the face of Amazon. And then you go to say, okay, so is the smile, that little smirk, because it's all over? But that, to me, that's brand. That's visual signals. It's brand logo. It's a smile. It's, again, we're talking logo. That's different than mascot. Amazon doesn't have one.
No.
Right? And we're talking big brands, and while Steve Jobs did have it, Apple doesn't now, but they're still referencing leaning on that, but they've got enough momentum that they, it was back when Apple was really trying to come back in the 90s that Steve Jobs brought that back, and while he was alive was that living, breathing face.
Yep.
And now he's it's more like the, our founding father, and they're leaving it at that. So, I mean, if you really stop and look, next time you're in the store, next time even just shopping, and it's not just products, it can be services. I think if you start opening up your eyes and you start noticing that, and then maybe start asking yourself too, if you're listening, like, what are those mascots? How are they helping that brand or hurting that brand? Because in your opinion, you may be going, I think they shouldn't have done that. That's fine too. But I think there's something about, like you said, it's a matter of putting a visual face in our minds that associate in a positive way the brand, help support it, and maybe that face is birthed out of a print ad campaign or something else, or social media campaign. But again, you got to do it smart, you got to do it sparingly, and you've got to not have it replace or overwrite. Let's say overwrite what your brand is currently trying to say, because the idea is like you're trying to create something that's synonymous with what your brand stands for, not replace it out of just trying to create a fun, memorable character. And that could be a road a small business does not want to go down. It's creating something that's going to undo whatever progress or advancement they've gotten in their market share.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a good point, because it is like, it's focusing on your strengths and how you're going to lean into that. And that makes me think of, even what Subway did with Jared during their biggest period of growth. Unfortunately, the end a little sour because the Jared guy turned out to be had charges against him. But while they were growing with Jared, it was huge. That's when Subway blew up. Yeah. And then they rolled into the $5 footlong and all that. And since then, it's like, that worked for them of using Jared as the mascot, because he represented the aspiration of what the Subway brand is. Subway Eat Fresh. It was, fresh food, lose weight, all these things. And it was aspirational, and he was the embodiment of
He was
that.
the poster child.
Yeah. And to me, that's very much a mascot.
But you got up a great point. It's like, just while there was a plus,
wah.
by having a poster child in whatever form that is,
A human,
if down the road that human turns to be fallible, that reflects on the brand, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
It's going to reflect on the brand. There's going to be some negative
Yep.
fallout. Hopefully not that much, but again, it's that idea that it's so funny because people get so excited, like when all of a sudden they've got some sort of name that they can lean their brand into, some celebrity or someone that's like, oh, I really like, an influencer, right?
Yeah.
Everybody, that would be today's version of television commercial spokesperson is today's social media influencers, right?
Yeah.
Brands are getting them all the time. But as soon as, what happens when that influencer self-destructs?
Yeah.
Is your brand, how close is your brand aligned with them and associated with them? Because then that could affect you too. So that's why it's a lot easier to manage to create something fictional, because you can control it.
They're not going to run off.
Yeah. Lucky Charms, Lucky the Leprechaun is going to go off on a drinking binge. The next
St. Patty's Day.
Next St. Patty's Day is going to go on a drunken binge and get a DUI, and now all of a sudden you've got your cereal's got a tainted reputation. But
that does, again, it goes back to how powerful that meaning, that character or person can embody the meaning. And just like you said with the association, it's like they do something sour, it's like that association can easily kind of cross contaminate to your brand. And it's up to you to protect that. But, again, going back to small businesses, it's like focusing on that familiarity, focusing on, like we always, talk about, is consistency, having that something that's identifiable and then familiar, and being able to go, okay, how do I now, with this, asset really signal the meaning? How do I want that to be perceived?
Yeah. Yeah.
And this might be completely off topic, but since we're on mascots, I have to know, what is your favorite mascot? Your favorite mascot of all time, ever.
Oh, geez. Ever?
Ever.
Man, that is a really tough one. You know what? I remember, I think because it was playing. I remember I mentioned him earlier, Tony the Tiger. I remember. I mean, obviously I'm an artist, a designer, but I remember drawing Tony the Tiger a couple times just out of fun. And maybe I was mirroring the cereal box or whatever. But I kind of got into. I like Tony the Tiger. But again, that was way back in the '70s and stuff. But
he's got a cool bandana.
He does.
It's cool.
Yeah. I don't know, because I think when you talk about favorite, to me, it almost like I want to have my mind go down the path of nostalgia.
Yeah.
Because when I think of favorite, it's not going to be something brand new that just launched.
No, exactly.
It's going to be something it's always been around most of my life. And so it makes me think going back to childhood, childhood mascots, brand mascots that I grew up with.
But that, I think, is part of the value. That's like, you think of a mascot as like you develop a relationship with. Just like with Ryan Reynolds, like I like Aviation Gin. I use his cell phone service because the personality of him I've started developing this relationship, you know?
Yeah, I don't know. I remember having McDonald's bed sheets. This is okay. Growing in the '70s, I had bed sheets. This is like, I mean, I'm talking, we're talking mid '70s, early grade school. I had bed sheets that had all the McDonald's characters. That had Grimace, Hamburger, Ronald, the Fry Guy, and I think there was something about with the shakes. No, that was Grimace. But yeah, the characters, and it was all cartoon, like it was all, but the characters, and it was all patterned out, but my bed sheets had all the McDonald's characters on it. And, when I think about it, going, wow, it's pretty bold of McDonald's back then in the 70s to
That's crazy.
Lean into like bedding for their brand extensions. But we saw them, we bought them, they were cool. I loved it. But that was at the birth. But that was back then when the Happy Meal was being born, and it was like they were marketing to kids in such an aggressive way. Yeah. But I don't know. Yeah. What about you? We're different generations. So what's a?
I remember Trix, or like the rabbit. But it is hard because you do think of cereal brand, like you think of nostalgic cereal brands.
The Cuckoo Bird.
Yeah, Coco.
Yeah.
It is hard because you do think of, and then there's ones that you don't think of, like even like Mickey Mouse is like it is a mascot. He is a mascot. Where it's like it's so synonymous with the brand itself, is that's what he represents. And people go like Mickey Mouse is almost this embodiment of Walt Disney. Like, and it's fascinating that way. But
it's interesting too, because when I was just thinking, I was flashing back to my childhood, and an interesting, like, it just made me think of a character that was synonymous with a product, but it was a non-branded product. And it was by proxy, not by direct, putting that character on the packaging. But Popeye the Sailor, and the spinach. The whole vibe was spinach, and the movement of Popeye commercials. It was all about. It was like promoting eating your spinach, which was like a kid's worst nightmare. And it was like you want to grow big and strong. You eat your can of spinach, boom, there you go. You're like a superhero. And Popeye pushed that, and I remember getting into eating spinach because it was just like it was almost like the mascot. It was almost like the spinach industry. You know how we have like the Dairy Council, and they they'll do like milk is good, right? Got milk. That was the council. It wasn't a brand of milk. It wasn't Lucerne coming with got milk. It was
the Ministry of Dairy.
Yeah, it was the Dairy Guild. But spinach, it was like, for whatever reason, Popeye boosted in the 70s. Popeye boosted the spinach industry.
Popeye's cool.
Well, he is cool. He needs to actually. Popeye needs to make a.
He's got the sailor thing. He always had the pipe. Like he's got the pipe going for him. Muscular. And he was always beating up the bad guys. He was tatted. He was tough.
But you know, and he was a brawler. Geez.
Yeah, he's always getting
but
fights.
I think, you know, anyway, we've rambled on. The mascots are great. They're great for an industry. They're fun, but they're a huge way of expressing your brand. And it may not be the right fit for everybody, but giving another visual signal that is a quote unquote face to your brand can be a huge boost and help, like Reilly said, you know, have an association and a connecting point and an acknowledgement that people just they connect with and they understand.
Yeah. And I feel like there's no silver bullets in brand development. You got to roll with it and look at, like Scott said, all the ways you signal and just see how you can get personality across, tonality, and most importantly, make your brand distinct.
Right.
And that's part of the perception.
Yeah. Well, hey, until next time, thank you for listening in. Your time is valuable, so we appreciate you giving us a listen. So until next time, cheers.